The Intergalactic Combat Academy stood on a neutral planet, far removed from the influence of any single species. Its mission was to cultivate warriors and leaders capable of maintaining the delicate peace among the galactic powers. Recruits from numerous species gathered here, eager to prove themselves and refine their combat skills. Among them was Laura, a quiet and observant human who had been assigned to Squad Sigma, a unit notorious for its fierce competitiveness. Unlike many of her peers, Laura wasn't loud or brash. While others flaunted their prowess and strength in the training halls, she remained mostly in the background. She listened intently during lectures and watched closely as her squadmates sparred. She participated in the required drills but never sought attention or recognition. Her subdued nature led many of her alien companions to underestimate her, assuming she was weak and unskilled. This sentiment was most vocalized by Rixer, one of the squad's strongest and most aggressive members. Rixer was a Kroi, a towering species of reptilian warriors known for their strength and agility. At nearly 3 meters tall, his muscular form was a testament to his battle-hardened nature, and his piercing yellow eyes often intimidated even the bravest cadets. Rixer had quickly claimed the role of the squad's leader, often challenging others to sparring contests to solidify his dominance. He had never been defeated, and his ego grew with each victory. From the moment Laura joined, Rixer had taken a disliking to her. To him, she was nothing more than an anomaly, slow, frail, and insignificant. He saw her presence in the academy as an insult, a sign that the academy's standards had slipped. He frequently mocked her during training sessions, but Laura remained silent, unfazed by his taunts. Her calmness only seemed to fuel his irritation. "What are you even doing here, human?" Rixer sneered during one of their combat drills. "You don't belong. Maybe you'd be better off working in logistics, far away from real battles." Laura didn't respond, focusing instead on her movements as she practiced defensive techniques. Over the years, she had learned that engaging with bullies only gave them power over her. Her silence, however, made her a prime target for Rixer's cruelty. The day of the challenge began like any other. The cadets assembled in the central training hall for a combat session. The air was alive with energy as recruits from different squads clashed, their grunts and weapon strikes echoing throughout the space. Laura stood near the practice dummies, adjusting her stance with quiet precision. Rixer, meanwhile, effortlessly defeated his opponent with a single, devastating blow. The crowd cheered as he raised his arms in victory, his chest swelling with pride. As the crowd began to disperse, Rixer's eyes locked onto Laura, who was still calmly refining her stance. Her tranquility seemed to irk him. She wasn't reacting to his display of power, and that only made him angrier. "Laura," he bellowed, his voice booming across the hall. The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to him. Laura glanced up, meeting his gaze with sharp, unblinking blue eyes. She didn't say a word, waiting for him to speak. "I challenge you to a duel," Rixer declared, his lips curling into a vicious smile. "Let's see if you can prove you're more than just a liability to this squad." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. It was unheard of for Rixer to challenge someone he saw as beneath him. Usually, he reserved challenges for those he considered worthy adversaries, and many assumed this was an attempt to crush Laura's reputation before it could take root. Most believed he was seeking to finally end the whispers surrounding her, to demonstrate her inferiority in front of the entire academy. For a moment, Laura remained silent, her gaze unwavering as she studied him, her face an emotionless mask. Then, without hesitation, she nodded. "I accept," she said quietly. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a mix of surprise, disbelief, and excitement. No one had expected her to agree. Most had anticipated a refusal, especially given her lack of experience and the stark size difference between them. Rixer's grin grew wider. He misinterpreted her acceptance as arrogance, and it was this arrogance he was eager to break. The duel was set for the following hour, granting both combatants time to prepare. As the others dispersed, Laura moved toward the locker room, her steps deliberate, unfazed by the lingering gazes and hushed comments. Inside the locker room, she settled on a bench and began methodically wrapping her hands in combat tape. Each movement was precise and controlled, an exercise in focus. As she worked, a fellow cadet, a slender amphibious being named Elin, approached cautiously. "Laura, are you certain about this?" he asked, his voice a series of melodic clicks. "Rixer, he's never been beaten. He's merciless." Laura met his gaze, her expression calm and resolute. "It's not about victory or defeat," she replied. "It's about proving I belong here." Elin studied her for a moment, uncertainty flickering in his wide, reflective eyes. He nodded and quietly stepped away, leaving her to finish her preparations. Once alone, Laura closed her eyes and took a steadying breath. Memories of her grueling training on Earth flooded her mind. Countless countless hours spent honing her skills in hand-to-hand combat, her body conditioned through repetitive drills that sharpened her instincts and tested her resilience. She had faced doubt before, and every time, she had proven her worth. When the time came, Laura stepped into the training arena. The circular space was surrounded by a throng of cadets, their eyes locked on her as she moved to stand across from Rixer. He towered over her, his body a wall of muscle, his scales gleaming under the arena's lights. His claws flexed with anticipation, and his tail whipped the air like a coiled serpent. The instructor, a STL-like alien with 6 eyes and a commanding presence, stepped forward to announce the rules. No weapons, no lethal strikes. The duel ends when one combatant yields or is incapacitated. Prepare yourselves. With a final, thunderous command, the instructor stepped back. Begin. Rixer wasted no time, launching himself at Laura with the speed and precision of a predator locking onto its prey. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the spectacle to unfold. The tension was thick in the air as Rixer's hulking form hurtled toward Laura, his claws extended, ready to tear into her. His momentum caused the air to ripple, the force of his advance disturbing the edges of her uniform. Most of the onlookers were certain the fight would be over in mere moments. Rixer's sheer strength had flattened many before, but Laura remained composed, her body poised and ready. She stood still as a spring wound tightly, awaiting the perfect moment to strike. In a split second, Laura shifted her weight and sidestepped, her motion so smooth and effortless it appeared almost fluid. Rixer's claws swiped through empty air, and his immense forward momentum nearly caused him to trip. The crowd let out a collective gasp as Laura faced him once again, her stance unwavering. Her piercing blue eyes remained locked on him, studying his every move with the focus of someone who had already anticipated his next strike. Rixer's teeth bared in a snarl, frustration evident on his face. He wasn't used to missing his target, and the misstep had bruised his pride. Quick footwork won't save you, human, he growled, his voice resonating in the arena. Laura didn't acknowledge the taunt. Instead, she subtly shifted her weight, balancing herself on the balls of her feet, her posture steady and poised. Her silence unnerved him, her composure seeming to pierce through his bravado. It was as if his towering size and strength were meaningless to her. Enraged, Rixer charged again, this time swinging his tail with precision, aiming to knock Laura off her feet. But Laura was already 2 steps ahead. She sprang into the air, narrowly avoiding the tail's strike and landing with fluid grace several feet away. The spectators were in disbelief, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Did she just dodge his tail? That's impossible, one cadet whispered in astonishment. She's fast, no doubt about it, another remarked. But how long can she keep this up? Rixer, on the other hand, was growing more frustrated with each failed attack. His pride was starting to slip away, and his determination only intensified. With a snarl, he charged once more, his speed unmatched as he closed the distance between them. His claws slashed through the air in rapid succession, each strike powerful enough to cleave metal. But Laura flowed around him, evading each strike with effortless precision. She wasn't just avoiding his attacks, she was reading them, deciphering his patterns, learning his weaknesses with every miss. Finally, the moment came for her counterattack. As Rixer's claws swiped down in a diagonal slash, Laura stepped inside his range, her body fluidly pivoting on her heel. Using his own momentum against him, she gripped his wrist and twisted sharply. The move caught him off guard, sending him stumbling sideways, his balance momentarily thrown off. The crowd collectively gasped as Rixer nearly lost his footing, teetering for the first time. His piercing yellow eyes narrowed in frustration as he steadied himself. "You think you're clever?" he spat, his voice thick with contempt. "Your tricks won't work again." But Laura remained silent, her expression serene and focused. Her breathing was steady, every movement calculated. It was clear she wasn't relying on sheer force. She was fighting with precision and strategy. Rixer let out a roar of anger and launched into a relentless barrage of attacks. His claws raked the air with vicious speed, his tail lashed out in deadly arcs, and his massive feet stomped the ground with enough force to crack the arena floor. Yet, no matter how furious or forceful his onslaught, Laura danced around him, her movements graceful and calculated, as if she had anticipated each strike before it even happened. The crowd, now fully invested, was on the edge of their seats. Cadets from all over leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief. The Academy's undefeated champion, the mighty Rixer, was being outmaneuvered by a human girl half his size. Shock rippled through the audience, and excitement built with every graceful movement she made. "She's not just dodging," one cadet remarked in awe. "She's controlling the pace of the fight. She's reading him," another observed. "Every move he makes, she's already thinking 2 steps ahead." With each passing moment, Laura's counters grew more precise. When Rixer overreached with a wild, reckless slash, she closed the gap and struck with a quick elbow to his side. The blow wasn't enough to cause serious damage, but was sufficient to throw him off balance. When he tried to use his tail as a weapon once more, Laura grabbed it mid-swing, redirecting his own momentum to send him tumbling sideways to the ground. The crowd erupted into cheers and gasps of disbelief. Rixer's pride took a severe blow, and the tension in the arena reached new heights. The mighty Croy scrambled to regain his footing, his scales glistening with sweat under the harsh lights. His breathing was ragged, his chest rising and falling with every labored breath. For the first time, the great Rixer seemed unsure of himself. He had severely underestimated Laura, and now he was paying the price. "You're a coward," he hissed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You hide behind your tricks and your speed. Fight me like a real warrior." Laura didn't flinch. Her posture remained unwavering, every movement calm and deliberate. She wasn't rattled by his taunts. Instead, she focused on keeping her composure, knowing that Rixer's growing frustration worked to her advantage. The battle continued, but now Rixer's strikes became increasingly reckless. His pride clouded his judgment, and he abandoned the fundamentals of combat in favor of brute force. Meanwhile, Laura stayed disciplined, every motion designed to expose his vulnerabilities. As he charged at her once more, she sidestepped just in time and landed a swift kick to the back of his knee, sending him stumbling forward. The crowd was on edge, unable to look away as the once invincible Rixer struggled to keep up with his much smaller opponent. Laura had yet to show any sign of fatigue, and the whispers of admiration for her skill began to spread among the cadets. No longer was she seen as the fragile outsider, she was a force to be reckoned with. As the duel neared its conclusion, it became increasingly clear Laura was not just surviving this fight, she was winning. Her strategy, patience, and ability to adapt had turned the tide. Rixer, now visibly exhausted and desperate, was losing ground. Every one of his wild, unrefined attacks played into her hands, while Laura's movements remained sharp, controlled, and precise. The audience fell into a hushed anticipation as Laura prepared for her next move. It was clear the fight was nearing its end. The quiet human girl had transformed into a warrior of exceptional skill, one that the Academy would never view the same way again. The tension in the arena had reached its peak. Rixer's frustration was palpable. His snarls grew louder, and his strikes grew even more reckless. Sweat ran down his scaled body as his chest heaved from the relentless effort. Meanwhile, Laura remained poised, her movements flowing effortlessly, her face betraying no emotion. She had dissected his every move, exploited his weaknesses, and dismantled his confidence. Yet, his pride as a Croy warrior refused to let him back down. "Fight me properly, human," Rixer roared, his voice reverberating throughout the arena. "Stop hiding behind your tricks." The crowd reacted in a wave of murmurs. Cadets from all factions leaned in, captivated by the unfolding battle. Some cheered for Rixer to regain control, but many were rooting silently for Laura, mesmerized by the way she had turned the duel in her favor. The tension in the arena was palpable, every movement between the two combatants drawing sharp breaths and hushed murmurs from the crowd. Rixer, now visibly frantic, lunged at Laura once more, his claws slicing the air in a frenzy of aggression. His strikes were no longer measured, driven instead by sheer fury and the need to crush the human who had dared to best him. But his recklessness only played into Laura's hand. As his claws came down in a wide arc, Laura responded with practiced precision. She ducked beneath his strike, pivoting quickly to slip behind him. In one smooth motion, she struck, driving her elbow into the vulnerable joint at the base of his tail, a weak point she had identified earlier in the fight. Rixer let out a pained roar as his tail spasmed, throwing off his balance. The crowd gasped in surprise, their voices rising in a mixture of shock and awe. The once untouchable Academy champion was now struggling to keep pace with the human who had anticipated his every move. "You're relying too much on brute force," Laura said calmly, her tone unwavering. It was the first time she had spoken during the duel. "Combat isn't about power alone. It's about strategy." Her words sliced through Rixer's rage, cutting deeper than any physical strike. They weren't taunts, but simple truths, reminders that she was outsmarting him at every turn. Enraged, Rixer's yellow eyes flashed as he charged again, his claws slashing toward her midsection. But this time, Laura didn't retreat. Instead, she moved forward, closing the gap faster than he anticipated. Before Rixer could react, Laura grabbed his wrist, twisting it in a fluid, calculated motion that forced him to lose control. Using his own momentum against him, she effortlessly flipped him over her shoulder, sending his massive frame crashing to the arena floor. The impact rattled the ground, sending a cloud of dust into the air. For a moment, the arena was still. The crowd stood in stunned silence, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Never before had anyone seen Rixer, the undefeated Croy warrior, so thoroughly outmaneuvered. But Laura wasn't finished. As Rixer struggled to rise, she stepped back, giving him space to regain his footing. She made no move to strike while he was down. She didn't take advantage of his vulnerability. Instead, she simply resumed her stance, calm and steady, her breath controlled. It was a silent statement. She would defeat him fairly, not through cheap shots, but on his terms. Rixer's tail flicked angrily as he pushed himself back onto his feet. His movements were slower now, his confidence shattered. He glared at Laura, his pride wrestling with the undeniable reality before him. For the first time, his gaze shifted, no longer seeing her as a weakling, no longer dismissing her as an inferior species, but as a warrior. And in that moment, he understood. She had earned her place here. As the fight resumed, it was clear to all watching that the balance had shifted. Rixer's attacks lacked the same precision, his movements more sluggish and disjointed. Laura, on the other hand, seemed as untouchable as ever. She dodged each strike with ease, effortlessly weaving around his wild attacks, then countering with sharp, precise blows aimed at his joints and pressure points. Each well-placed strike wore him down further, pushing him deeper into defense. Rixer, the once imposing force of the academy, was slowly being dismantled by the quiet, calculating human girl. The decisive moment arrived when Rixer, drained but determined, launched one final attack. With what little strength remained, he charged at Laura, his claws aimed directly at her chest. But Laura was ready. In a seamless motion, she sidestepped his assault, her hands moving with blinding speed to seize his arm and twist it behind him. Without hesitation, she swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground, pinned beneath her. Rixer growled in frustration, his body straining against her hold, but Laura's grip was unyielding, her strength matching her technique. She leaned in slightly, her voice steady but firm as she spoke. "Yield." Her words, simple yet resolute, cut through the tension in the arena, silencing the crowd for a brief moment. Rixer hesitated, his pride warring with the undeniable truth of his defeat. After a moment of internal struggle, he let out a low growl and tapped the ground twice, an unmistakable sign of surrender. The arena erupted into applause, the cadets finally breaking their silence as they cheered. Laura released him and stepped back, maintaining her composed demeanor. She extended a hand toward him, offering to help him rise. For a brief instant, Rixer hesitated, his yellow eyes searching hers. Then, with a reluctant nod, he took her hand and allowed her to help him to his feet. The crowd's cheers grew louder, reverberating throughout the arena. Laura turned to face them, her piercing blue eyes scanning the sea of faces. In that moment, she realized she had earned their respect, not through sheer strength, but through strategy, composure, and skill. For the first time, the cadets saw her not as an outsider, but as a peer, a warrior who belonged in their midst. Rixer, though humbled, stood beside her. He raised one clawed hand in acknowledgement, calling the crowd's attention. "The human fought well," he said, his voice carrying over the roar of the spectators. "She has earned her place here." The crowd's cheers erupted once again, echoing throughout the arena. Laura, despite her quiet nature, allowed herself a subtle smile of satisfaction. For her, this duel had not been solely about victory, it was about proving her worth. And in that moment, she knew she had achieved that goal. As the applause continued, Rixer stood next to Laura, now looking at her not with the scorn he had once harbored, but with genuine respect. The disdain in his yellow eyes had been replaced with a flicker of understanding. Laura remained poised, her breathing steady despite the intensity of the battle. The weight of the moment settled on her, not as a burden, but as confirmation of everything she had worked for. She had earned her place, not only in the eyes of her peers, but in the academy itself. The crowd began to disperse, and murmurs filled the air. Cadets exchanged thoughts in hushed voices, some in awe of the human girl who had defeated the academy's undefeated champion. Though some remained skeptical, the consensus was clear: Laura was no ordinary recruit. In the locker room, Laura carefully unwrapped the combat tape from her hands, her mind replaying the fight in vivid detail. She recalled each calculated move, the risks she had taken, and the precision of her final strike. It had all been the result of years of training and discipline, yet her reflection was interrupted by a familiar presence in the doorway. Rixer stood there, his imposing figure casting a shadow in the doorway, blocking the light behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. A low, rumbling voice broke the silence. "You fought well," Rixer said, his tone quieter than usual. usual, almost thoughtful. Better than I thought you would. Laura met his gaze without hesitation. Thank you, she replied evenly, her voice calm. Rixer paused, as if considering his next words carefully. I underestimated you, he admitted, his tone carrying the weight of reluctant honesty. I won't make that mistake again. A faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered on Laura's face. Good, she said simply, because next time, I won't be going easy on you. Rixer's laugh, deep and resonant, filled the room, surprising a few nearby cadets. It wasn't a laugh filled with malice, but rather one that radiated genuine amusement. You have spirit, human, he said, his voice warm with newfound respect. I respect that. The following day, the academy gathered for their weekly evaluation. The instructors, seasoned warriors from various corners of the galaxy, sat on an elevated platform overseeing the cadets below. The head instructor, a tall alien with 6 eyes and a deep, commanding voice, stepped forward. Yesterday's duel between Cadet Rixer and Cadet Laura has garnered much attention. He began, his gaze sweeping across the assembly of recruits. It was more than just a demonstration of skill. It was a clear representation of what this academy stands for. The room fell into a hushed silence, every cadet hanging on his every word. Cadet Laura exemplified the core values we hold most dear: strategy, discipline, and the capacity to adapt under pressure. These are the hallmarks of a true warrior. Her victory was not by chance, but by the mastery of these principles. The head instructor's eyes fixed directly on Laura. Cadet Laura stepped forward. Without hesitation, Laura rose and moved steadily toward the front, her every step purposeful. The head instructor continued, his voice carrying across the room. Your performance in the duel has set a new benchmark. You have shown us that strength is not merely a physical trait, but a combination of mental sharpness and tactical expertise. For this, you are to be commended. A thunderous applause followed, the cadets pounding their fists against their chests in a universal gesture of respect at the academy. Laura stood tall, her composure unshaken, but deep within her, the recognition stirred a sense of pride. She had never sought attention, but in that moment it was clear she had earned their respect. The duel had marked a turning point in the dynamics of Squad Sigma. Those who had once overlooked Laura now sought her guidance during training. Even Rixer, who had once been her harshest critic, began training alongside her, offering insights and refining strategies together. The mutual respect between them grew, a testament to the power of skill over sheer strength. Their sparring sessions quickly became the highlight of the squad's routine, drawing crowds eager to witness the clash of raw power and meticulous technique. During one particularly intense round, Rixer paused mid-strike, his tail twitching thoughtfully. You know, he said, his voice lighter than usual, if you'd been born a Croy, you'd probably be running this academy by now. Laura smirked, her eyes glinting. If I'd been born a Croy, I wouldn't have had the chance to catch you off guard. Rixer let out a hearty laugh that echoed through the training hall. What had once been a rivalry built on mockery and competition had evolved into something deeper, an unspoken bond of respect forged in the heat of battle. As the weeks passed, Laura's influence began to extend beyond just her squad. Her methodical, adaptive approach to combat started to seep into the training routines of other squads. Cadets from every species began integrating her techniques, adapting them to their own strengths. Laura's success became more than just a personal victory. It symbolized the power of diversity in tactics and perspectives, a reminder that collaboration and adaptability could elevate the academy as a whole. One evening, while eating in the mess hall, a young cadet approached her. He was small and wiry, his pale blue skin adorned with faint bioluminescent patterns. He stood for a moment, hesitant, before speaking in a quiet voice. Cadet Laura, he began, watching you fight, it gave me hope. I didn't think someone like me could make it here, but now I think I can. Laura smiled, her expression softening. You can, she said with unwavering conviction. It's not about where you come from, it's about how you approach the fight. The cadet nodded, his shoulders lifting with renewed confidence as he walked away. Laura watched him go, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't expected. Her journey had transformed. It was no longer just about proving herself. It was about inspiring others to follow suit. The duel that had marked her rise in the academy became a defining story, one that cadets would tell for years to come. It was the story of a quiet human who defied expectations and emerged victorious, challenging the norms of the academy and leaving an indelible mark. For Laura, that fight marked the beginning of something much greater. Her unwavering determination, combined with her sharp mind and tactical prowess, had carved out her place at the academy, not through raw power, but through skill, strategy, and a steadfast belief in her own worth. As she walked through the hallways, her peers stepping aside in respectful silence, she knew one thing for certain: she had earned her place here.